Welcome to day 24 in our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Today's lesson is entitled, Time and Chance Happen to Them All. Our verses today come from Ecclesiastes chapter 9. We'll be reading verses 11 through 18. Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge. But time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared at an evil time, when it suddenly falls upon them. I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor, wise man, and he, by his wisdom, delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. One of the more fascinating studies in recent history is that of twins. Geneticists have a keen interest in these because of the shared genes. In identical twins, known as monozygotic, they share all the genes, while in fraternal twins, dizygotic, they share only 50% of the genes. Of special interest are the traits passed down in the susceptibility to diseases. For instance, in cases where a twin gets Parkinson's disease, 89% of the time, the other twin will not be affected in identical twins, and even less in fraternal twins. In other cases of identical twins, a noticeable increase in rates of schizophrenia were found over those of the general population. Geneticists and researchers share a common interest in these studies as it can help in understanding the difference in the role of genetics and environmental impacts. What is perhaps even more fascinating is the research done on twins who have been separated from birth. The Minnesota Twins family study, not to be confused with the baseball team, begun in 1987 and has yielded some remarkable results. Elizabeth Hamill and Ann Hunt spent 78 years apart, separated from birth. One lived in Oregon in the United States and the other in the United Kingdom. Both Elizabeth and Ann were widowed, each having been married to a man named Jim. Both were religious. A little unusual, you'll have to admit. Now, if you really want an odd one, consider these triplets that were separated at birth, featured in the 2018 documentary, Three Identical Strangers. Three brothers were reunited 19 years after birth. Two of the brothers were enrolled in a New York college and were often mistaken for each other, unbeknownst to each other until they were introduced. Then brother number 3 contacted them when he realized he was a sibling as well. What is more unusual are their mannerisms. They sit the same way. All were wrestlers. They liked the same colors. All smoked the same cigarettes. Each had an adopted sister that were coincidentally the same age. There is a sad part to this. The mother knowingly gave up these triplets so that they could be researched over the years. These studies lend themselves to those who desire to know the influence of nature versus nurture as it pertains to which is greater. Is it the genetics that play a greater role in the development of a child, or is it the environment that they are raised in? That debate is, I'm quite sure, going to continue on for some time. There is one other factor that plays a role to a lesser or greater degree that is not often mentioned in these discussions. It is that of chance. These variables are perhaps the wildest of the unpredictable. Consider A child has good genes and a stable home environment. But there are also probabilities that simply cannot be calculated into this equation. A child contracts a disease from another child that keeps it home, and in the meantime, the school bus the child would normally ride is in an accident that kills all the children. In another, a child is hit in the eye by an object and loses sight in that eye, greatly altering its life. On and on it goes as to things that might happen that will have a profound effect on their lives. Solomon adds factors into this complex book: time and chance. He says this happens to all. How can one quantify such things? Solomon has approached this conflict before. We read in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verses 14 and 15, "The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity." We may think, as would be reasonable, that the race does go to the swifter runner. After all, the law of physics demands that. If I run faster than the other, then I, by definition, will travel the same distance quicker and thus will win. There are laws and reasoning that govern each of those that Solomon follows with. Nor the battle to the strong, bread to the wise, riches to the intelligent, or favor to those with knowledge. But there is always chance, or what some call luck, in these equations. The swifter one might fall. The strong may have the sun in his eyes. The wise may have to contend with a famine. The intelligent one may be too lazy. Who knows why the knowledgeable one cannot find favor? Therein lies the fallacy of human reasoning. We may look back at the wisdom and providence of God in putting Joseph in Egypt amid the perils and all he went through, and then realize he was put there to save the race of people called to take forth the lineage of the Messiah one day. The little girl in Israel taken prisoner so that one day she might tell Naaman about the prophet in Israel who can heal him. 4 young men of noble birth taken into exile and one day become leaders under the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. That which Solomon and we so often call chance, or worse, bad luck, God has a way of working His providential care into our lives. Paul tells us in Romans chapter 8, beginning in verse 25, "But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And He who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, in order that He might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom He predestined, He also called. And those whom He called, He also justified. And those whom He justified, He also glorified." Yet Solomon also declares that even such things are not perceived or appreciated at the time. In verses 14 and 15 of our chapter today, "There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he, by his wisdom, delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man." Was that not the case with Joseph in prison? We read in Genesis chapter 40, verses 12 through 14. "Then Joseph said to him, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hands as formerly, when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness of mentioning me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house." But note what happens later in verse 23 of that chapter. "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." Was this not how Christ was treated in his hometown in Matthew chapter 13, verses 53 through 57? "And when Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there, and coming to his hometown, he taught them in a synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, 'Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph, and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things?' And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, 'A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and in his own household.'" Of a truth, Solomon surely did declare in verses 16 through 18, "But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good." Now Solomon is in full force, and by wisdom begins to extol wisdom for its virtues, and from here on out will enlighten the reader with it. Are you able to take hold of wisdom's promise and seek it for all it's worth? Can you overcome your nature and environment and become wise? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow for another lesson from the book of Ecclesiastes.